Who's your neighbor? Who's your neighbor? Man was mugged and beaten. 84 people watched from their apartment window as they heard it taking place, but did nothing to help. Didn't even call 911. A man who had left his worship service was walking down the street, and he hears the cries and the pleas for help, but he just crosses the street to the other sidewalk and continues to go home because he had a wife and kids at home. He couldn't risk getting himself killed. A few minutes later, a pastor of that same church came and heard the cries for help. But who knows what kind of disease or sickness the guy had that was bleeding. And so, wasn't in the pastor's job description. So he just walked by. Then right behind the pastor shortly came a Muslim man. The Muslim saw the man crying for help. And so he went up to him immediately and started to take care of him, see what was going on with him, see what was wrong. But before long, he realized that he recognized the man who had been beaten. He recognized him from the news as one of the suspects that had potentially burned down one of the mosques in the neighborhood. But he still didn't hesitate. He still took care of the man. He called 911. He got the paramedics there, and he rode with the man to the hospital in the ambulance. He sat in the waiting room while the doctors took care of the man. And he waited until the doctor said it was okay for him to go back and see him. The man was still unconscious at the time. But the Muslim man just sat there, looking at the man, realizing that it could have possibly been him in his place. But you see, this Muslim man, he had been successful in life. He had been blessed in life. And so he realized that he felt like he needed to do something to help this man. So he goes out to the nurse's station and he asks what he needs to do, who he needs to talk to, because he wants to pay for this man's medical expenses. So the man pays for his medical expenses. A few days later, when the nurses came to discharge the man who had been beaten, they handed him his bill at the same time. And he just looks at it puzzled but yet amazed as he reads the words, paid in full. Which one of these three men was a neighbor to the man who had been beaten? The third one, the Muslim man. Of the three people in this story, which one of them had the most legitimate excuse to not help? Granted, there are no excuses, but which one would we say had the most legitimate excuse? The guy who's Muslim, and the guy burned down a Muslim mosque, place of worship. So it would have been like burning down a church. But he helped him anyway. And Jesus says at the end of the parable, go and do likewise. But you see, this was almost an insult to the man that Jesus was talking to, because the Samaritan in the story was an enemy. He didn't want to be like a Samaritan. But yet it was the Samaritan who did the right thing, who treated this person as a neighbor. So who is our neighbor? Is it that grumpy guy that you live next door to? Or is it the nice guy on the other side that you claim? Well, see, our neighbor is everyone. Any person that you come into contact with, they're your neighbor. Whether you know them or you don't know them, they're your neighbor. But in this case, in this story, in this parable that Jesus shares, it was the enemy that was the neighbor. The people that didn't want to help them, that was their neighbor. The only thing that mattered was they needed help. Nothing else. So if you will, turn with me in your Bibles to Jeremiah chapter 29. As we look at this scripture text, we're going to see that there are three kind of levels of transformation that take place. As a church, we've stated that we want to be about holistic transformation. We've said that this is a value for us. This is one of the things that motivates us as a church, that we want to care about the whole person and not just say we want to care about the spiritual aspect of a person's life, but we want to care about all aspects of a person's life. And so as we look at this scripture, we're going to see three transformations. We're going to see an individual transformation. We're going to see a church transformation. We're going to see a community transformation. So let's look at Jeremiah chapter 29, starting in verse 4. It says, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." Let's stop right there because you need to hear what that just said. So, the Israelites, the people in Jerusalem, the Hebrew people, had been taken into exile by the Babylonians. Now, if we were the Hebrew people, who would be blaming if we were just taken captive and we were taken into exile and we were taken from our homeland and taken to Babylon? Who would we be blaming? Anybody. Probably the people who took us into exile, right? The Babylonians, right? But God just wants to clear up everything for the Hebrew people, and he starts out by saying, to those I carried. He didn't say to those the Babylonians carried. He says, to those I carried into exile. God is ahead of all of it. God's in control even when we don't think he is. So what does this mean? I think what God is saying to the people of Jerusalem that are in exile is, I'm the one who's allowed this to happen. And I've created this time for you. I've created a time for you. Because you see, the Hebrew people, they had distanced themselves from God. They had turned to other gods. They had created idols. They hadn't obeyed God, and God needed to get their attention. So he has them carried into exile. He says, you are here for such a time as this. In this moment in your life, regardless of where you find yourself, whether this is the best moment, the best time that you've ever had in your life's existence, or this is the most miserable time of your life, you are here for such a time as this. Because this moment, you're either living in the moment that God created you for, or you're living in a moment that God is preparing you for something else. So we're always between those two moments, those two places in life. So he goes on. Verse 5, he says, build houses and settle down. Plant gardens. Eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons, and give your daughters in marriage so that they may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Do not decrease. Build houses, settle down. They're in a strange land. The only thing they want to do is get out. But God is telling them, stop and build a house. create a family, prepare them, plant a garden, and eat what it produces. Be prepared. Then he goes on to make the statement that we really don't like. Well, if you know the circumstances, you really wouldn't like. Verse 7. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Okay, I get verses 5 and 6 because that's about me. That's about me taking care of my family. That's about me preparing what I need to do to stay for the long haul. We find later that God says 70 years is what they're going to be in exile with the Babylonians for. So you need to prepare yourself to be there for a long time. So verse 5 and 6 are all about me and my family. But 7, now you're kind of pushing it, God. Now you're telling me that I have to care about the people who have brought me here. I have to care about these pagan people that could care less about you, God. Putting aside the fact that I probably wasn't worshiping you either when I was in Jerusalem, but we're not talking about them, us right now. We're talking about them. But settle down. And he says, seek the peace and prosperity. Seek the peace and prosperity. In other translations, you may read that word peace as seek the well-being of the people. Seek the well-being. The word that's actually written there in the Hebrew is the word shalom. Have you ever heard the word shalom before? Shalom is the Jewish word or the Hebrew word for peace. But this isn't the 60s peace that we think of. This is a greater peace. This isn't just like having a peace because my finances and my checkbook balanced. This isn't a peace that I still have a job, I didn't get fired today. This is the ultimate peace that any person could ever experience. This peace was a peace that dominated all aspects of life. It wasn't just your spiritual life. It wasn't just your physical life and your material possessions thing. It was your whole being was at peace. And ultimately, it was your relationship with God was at peace. And that's what they're to do. They're to seek the well-being of the people. Everything that they do should be about the prosperity and the peace of the people that they are not like. How do you change a culture? Have you ever tried to change culture? Have you ever tried to change something from the outside? Have you ever done that? It's like being a normal, regular day person trying to change the government. You gonna do it? Probably not. It's kind of like me as the pastor trying to change the other churches in town. It's not gonna happen. How do you change culture? Okay, I know. As the pastor, I'm going to come into this culture and I'm going to change all of you guys the way I want you to be. Think that's going to work? No. You're probably going to kick me out on the way, and I'm probably going to be the bloody, beaten up guy in the alley type of thing. No. What you would do? I have to come in here and I have to mesh with the culture. I've got to become the culture before I can change the culture. So what God is saying is, you have to become one of them. You have to forget about Jerusalem, and for 70 years, you need to be a Babylonian. And when they see that you're part of them, they'll be willing to accept who I am as God. See, because it really doesn't matter who the president is. It doesn't matter who the governor, the mayor. It doesn't matter if the Democrats or the Republicans are in the majority vote. Those things don't matter. It doesn't matter if you like the political system in your city. It doesn't matter if you like your neighbors next to you. The only thing that matters is how you live your life. How do you live your life? Community transformation, it's a big thing. It's a big idea. How do we go from transforming a community? So how many of you, native people to Blackford County, would say that Blackford County could use some community transformation? How many of you think that our community needs some hope? Our community needs some faith. Our community needs some love in it, right? I would hope that everyone would raise their hand in their head, whether or not they believe it or not, because it's true. It doesn't matter where we are, we all need those things, faith, hope, and love. So how do you change a community? You see, there have been people who have tried to change a community by going right to the community. We're just going to change everything. We're changing all the ordinances. We're changing how we do everything. And that's how we're going to change a community. But that doesn't change a community. Why? Because you haven't changed the people. The first transformation that has to happen is there has to be a transformation within the individuals, within the people. And when that transformation happens, majority of the time that transformation happens to the people who hopefully are in church, who hopefully are having a relationship with God. And when that begins to happen, you begin to transform a church. And it's only after individuals and churches that have been transformed that a community could ever begin to see transformation. I truly believe that any transformation that will happen in any location will come first in individuals, second in the church. And it will happen in the community because the church believed it was possible. Because right now, I think if I would have sent out a survey to you and that you had to fill it out before I gave this message, majority of you would say, it's not possible. There's no way. There's no way we could be a community that lives for Christ. So how do we change? How do we transform a community? One person said, if you want to change society, then you must tell an alternative story. Think about the story right now. How would you define the story that's being told to the people in this community? Is it a story of hope? Is it a story of love? I don't think it is. I don't think it is. So if we want to change a society, we need to tell an alternative story. Christianity grew at a rate of 40% per decade for the first 300 years of Christianity. 40%. We're declining faster than that some years today. 40% for the first 300 years per decade. During that 300-year period, there were at least 2 major plagues that took place. It wiped out a lot of the population. But when other people ran, and other people went to save their life and went to find places that it was safe to live, there was one group of people that could still be found. It was the Christians. They stayed behind and they risked their own lives taking care of the sick. some people lost their life. But statistically, when they go back and they look at populations after these plagues, guess what they found? Christians survived at an 80% rate after a plague. Non-Christians survived, I think, at like 55 to 60% rate. Now think about that. The people who left still died. But God took care of them. God protected them. Because of what they were doing, they were risking their lives to care for others. And many of them they didn't know. Augustine of Hippo, would you love to have that name? Pretty sure I'd get a name change. But anyway, he insisted that the church was not a refuge from the world, but existed for the sake of the world that was hurting. It was not a refuge from the world, but it was sent into the world. St. Patrick was taken into slavery when he was a young man. He was taken to Ireland, which was not where he was from. He was taken to Ireland as a slave, and he was a slave for 6 years of his life in Ireland. He finally escaped. And when he had escaped and he went home, he found God. No, God found him. God knew where he was. But he began to grow this relationship with God, and he felt God calling him to something he didn't want to let God call him to. But he felt God was calling him to go back and share the gospel with the people who had enslaved him for 6 years. And so Patrick went back to Ireland as a missionary to the people. And after his 28 years of continuous ministry in Ireland, Patrick had planted 700 churches. He had ordained 1,000 priests for ministry. 30 to 40 of the 150 tribes, so there's 150 tribes in Ireland, 30 to 40 of them were considered to be predominantly Christian. Patrick was actually the first person to publicly crusade against slavery. And guess where he did it? Not outside, but he did it right inside. He went to Ireland. He went to the place where they had kept him captive for so many years. They had tried to change his identity, but when he came back, he changed theirs. So why did Christians stay behind and face their own death to care for the sick? Why does the church exist for hurting people? Why did Patrick return to people who had treated him only as a possession, keeping him bound for slavery in 6 years? Why? This is why. Because transformed people want to transform people. When you've truly been transformed, you want to see transformation in people. You want to help people transform their life. You want to see them live a better life than they are. When you've had God transform you. And we have an opportunity today, pretty cool opportunity. So last week I shared with you part of the vision that we have going forward as a church, and I shared with you about being a church that exists for the community, about reaching people that don't know Christ, but loving them in a way that shows them Christ. Like, I'm not oblivious to things. I saw the 7 Taylor students walk in church before worship. They walked up to me after worship and said, "Hey, we need to talk to you about something." Okay. Well, see, what you don't know is the Thursday before, last Sunday, I had went and I had a conversation with the campus pastor at Taylor. And I said, how can we begin to bridge the gap between our church and Taylor students? How can we reach them? How can we help them get involved with some of the things that we're doing here as a church? How can we help them? They gave me a few ideas about how to interact with students. But what I didn't know was right after my meeting, John Kavanaugh, the campus pastor, left my meeting and went and met with these students. And these students have something on their heart and says, you know what, we see a need. We see some kids that need something. Remember last week I made the comment, if you were here, I made the comment that too many times we're willing to say that there's a problem, but we're not willing to be the solution to the problem. I want you to listen to these college students as they come and share a solution to a problem.
Good morning, everybody. So, as Pastor said, we are students from Taylor University, and going on about 2 weeks ago, my girlfriend had this idea to come up with a way to get money and raise money for students at Southside Elementary just down the road. There was a lot of need that she saw in her classroom. She observes there, and she wanted a way to help those kids out, and she came to a few of us, and we started brainstorming some ideas of how we can do this and how we can help the kids, especially this Christmas season. And so what we came up with was this thing called Promise Prayer Cords, and what we were going to do was make as many bracelets as we could of these. They are made of paracord with 2 beads, one purple representing Taylor and one red representing Southside Elementary. And so we were going to make as many of these as we could and sell them to the local community at the college, here in Hartford City, in Upland, Gas City, wherever we could, and take that money and then go to Southside Elementary, get some papers and some things that they need for the students there, and go buy clothes, shoes, coats, whatever we could, just to help these kids out so that way some of them could get a good Christmas. Mouse has a story of one of the kids that she observed there at Southside.
All right, so yeah, I teach there. I observe a teacher there, and there was a kid that just came in 2 weeks ago. I got news that a new kid was coming, and I was really excited. I didn't know anything about him, nothing. I love kids, and he walked in and he ran up and gave me a hug. Never once talked to this kid, never once. And he ran up and gave me a hug, and he says, "My mommy bought me new shoes." And he was so excited. And I looked down, and he was wearing tattered cleats. And as you know, in school, you're not allowed to wear cleats just because it rips up the floor. And then I come to find out later that he's homeless. These are my kids. I love them so much, and we can't just sit here at all. These are my kids. There's no way we can sit here and just let it happen. I love them. And in Zechariah, it talks about letting your hands be strong so that the temple may be built. And this is our chance right now to build the temple. And this bracelet that we have right here, even though it's so simple, God's making it possible for us to build this temple. Let this wristband make you remember the fact that your hands need to be strong so that we can build this temple together. We need you guys just as much as you need us. We need you guys so much in this community. This is huge. And the fact that this came together in 72 hours is incredible. The Lord moved in so many ways these last week and a half. Like we had 10 meetings in one day to get all this approved, and all of it fell into place. And in fact, we had a ton of Taylor students get together yesterday to make these prayer cords. And we made 3,349 bracelets. in a couple hours. And you can't even tell me that the Lord wasn't in charge of that. Like, this is nothing of us. Nothing of us. He's the one who gave me the idea. He's the one who brought upon every bit of this. And he needs you guys, and he needs us.
So a little bit about how we came to Pastor Dustin. Actually, in the meeting with John Kavanaugh after Pastor Dustin went to him, John Kavanaugh came to us and he was like, yeah, this is crazy because I just had this meeting with this pastor. And so that Sunday, which was last Sunday, we came here and we talked with Pastor Dustin. And what we're asking you guys to do is if you would be willing to buy some of the bracelets. What we're doing is we're selling them for donation, but we're asking really for $2 about to reach our goal of what we want, which is about $6,000. And so we're coming to you guys kind of in a need and asking humbly if you guys would be willing to help us with this and helping not even just us, but the kids at Southside Elementary and just in the local community here in Hartford City. And so really that's what we're asking of you right here is to just buy some prayer cords if you can. And again, when we receive this, we call them promise prayer cords because we're asking that you're promising to pray for these two things, and that is Taylor as a whole, and then Southside Elementary and the local community here in Hartford City, especially for those kids that need a little bit more this Christmas. So when you purchase one, we're just asking that you would be able to pray for those and stay committed this holiday season to praying for those two things. And before we leave, I'd like to actually have Charbel share his story of actually how he became involved with us, because it was a really, really cool story of how it happened and how God worked through that.
Yeah, so I'm an international student. I'm actually from Ireland, Dublin, Ireland, and I play for Taylor soccer team too. So I was coming back from the gym one day, and I was walking towards the library, and on the way to the library, the chapel is on the right, the prayer chapel. So I really felt God like bringing me towards that area, and it's not a place where I normally always go. I normally pray inside my dorm building in my room, but I was just walking by, and I just felt God calling me towards there. So I walked towards the chapel, and there was a group of these guys meeting up for the first time. And so I was like, okay, this place is busy. I'm going to come back later. But then I was like, wait, I really feel God calling me here to just like walk in. So I had the option to either leave and come back later or really walk in and just see what they're doing. So I walked into the chapel, and I seen them there doing this. And I was like, so what's happening? And they kind of like told me all about it. And so I was just amazed. And I asked myself the question that night, so when God calls you, do you answer? And what do you do? Like, do you accept the calling that God has given you? So yeah, we just dedicated our time yesterday. We spent 7 hours yesterday making these prayer cords, and the whole gathering of students came and helped us, and it's just a really amazing thing happening here, and I'm just so glad to be part of it.
So hopefully you all can see too that God's been moving a lot in just this week and a half for this little thing that we're doing. And so I ask that you guys would help us be involved in this and help those kids in Southside Elementary. So thank you.
Also, the bracelets that we have over there, they're like all different sizes, but we're customizing them to your wrist. So just so you guys know, so you guys aren't like afraid that it's not going to fit you or whatnot, like we customize it to your wrist.
Simple thing. You know, one of the things that I realized as I was preparing for the vision, as I was kind of putting the vision that God had put in my heart for the church and for the community and thinking about what it is that he wanted us to do, one of the things that jumped out to me was to do what God is calling us to is going to take all of us, but it's going to be driven by young people. And I know, looking around the room, You're like, we only got a certain amount of those people. But yet, here they are in a way that we wouldn't expect them. Them teaching us something about reaching our community. They're freshmen. I think one of them was a sophomore last week. 2 sophomores. They don't know anything about Hartford City, but we live in it. I think we can learn something about what it means to love a community from them. I thank them for being willing to do this. They literally got all the approval from Taylor, all the approval from Blackford County School System in like 2 days. That doesn't happen. Trust me, I've tried to do things like that. So thinking about a community, we have just in our congregation, we have people involved in food service, education, medical and health care, government, law enforcement, public service, construction, industrial, and faith-based organizations. We have all of those things represented in this church. But you see, we try to fit all the people out there in the public into here, this church. When in reality, the church already exists at the hospital, at the medical clinics. The church already exists at those food service organizations. The church already exists in our education system. We're in it. We're in those things. So our transformation should impact the transformation of our community. What I love about Jeremiah 29:11, finishing up real quickly, I promise. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope in a future." What does this tell me? Remember when I said that if we surveyed all of you, you'd probably say, yeah, right, not going to happen in Blackford County? This just tells me right here that God has hope and a future. That restoration, that transformation of a community is possible. But it's not possible if we keep the truth and we sit on our hands. It's only possible when we take the truth and reach out our hands. It's possible. Will you be about the peace and the prosperity of your community? I pray you will, and I pray that your first step is to come over here and see these young men and women